We're here at the Nikki Haley event where young voters are sharing their thoughts about the upcoming election. DePaul's Faculty Council recently released their annual report regarding faculty and student diversity. I'm Lina Gebhardt. Here's how some of this report breaks down. Like all generations, young voters want to find a president who can make them feel like their voices are being heard. Voters who are old, young, and in between all need to find a president who's up for the task. But finding a candidate that can balance mental fitness, experience, and the demands of every generation is hard to find. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt. Voters in Iowa are the first in the nation to impact the presidential election. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt. And this ties into the university's stated commitments. According to President Robert Manuel's Designing DePaul initiative, a key aspect of the modern Vincentian University is to, quote, generate experiences which promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt. The overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022 means abortions are more difficult to access in many American states. Here in Mount Vernon, Iowa, and all across the state, blizzard-like conditions and cold deterred some voters, but couldn't stop an important display of democracy from happening.
03, DeSantis. 04, Haley.
For decades, and per Iowa law, caucuses are held every 2 years during the midterm and presidential election seasons. Over 1,000 individual and county-based caucuses take place across the state at various locations such as churches and schools. The Iowa caucus is the first and most intimate contest in the presidential nomination process. Voters like Richard Jensen can participate by both expressing their thoughts and casting ballots in support of their candidate.
And I've thought to myself more than a time or two, is this the best we can do? If so, we're in trouble. We need to make a change.
Republican caucus goers at locations such as Mount Vernon Community High School saw candidates like former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley on their ballots. The nature of the Iowa caucuses has generated widespread media attention and become a targeted aspect of presidential campaigns. At Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, Dr. Megan Goldberg, a political science professor, explains why the Iowa caucuses are unique.
Yeah, so I think one thing about Iowa going first is that it's this like flyover rural state that doesn't feel like it gets a lot of attention elsewhere. And so you get these like really interesting moments in the campaign of like the state fair and these visuals of candidates like at farms. And I think for a lot of people, this feels like a real America sort of moment, even though most Americans don't live in this sort of a setting. Iowa's a really small state, and most Americans don't live in rural areas. But you're also getting candidates who aren't necessarily from a state like this, or from sort of like the same cultural background, and you're putting them in this context.
While the Iowa caucuses are not always an indicator of how successful a presidential candidate will be in the primary or general elections, the caucuses remain an important aspect of the campaigning process and the Iowa culture. Those who aren't from Iowa might ask, why Iowa? Kyle Telecki, a volunteer who's been caucusing for over 30 years, explains its appeal.
I think the interesting thing is a lot of times people say, why Iowa? And Iowa doesn't always end up choosing the president. I think the process is more about narrowing down the candidates than it is necessarily picking who the next candidate is going to be for the president. And I think that really helps the nation because we get to be the first people to vet them.
Voters in Iowa are the first in the nation to impact the presidential election. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt. President Joe Biden is currently the oldest sitting president in American history, followed by former President Donald Trump. Ahead of the November elections, many people are concerned about the age and abilities of our candidates. However, this isn't the first time in American history where this has been brought into question.
Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Nearly 40 years later, America is watching both of our likely presidential candidates face scrutiny over their age. At 81, President Biden has stuttered, misattributed information, and stumbled frequently on camera. In a Department of Justice report, Special Counsel Robert Hur, a Republican, described Biden as an elderly man with poor memory. That comment has been criticized and disputed by the president as unfair and political. Chris Bury, a DePaul journalism professor and former ABC News correspondent, explains the concern.
Biden stutters. The fact that he's old doesn't help that. He doesn't come across that well on television. Trump has been making a lot of mental mistakes too, confusing Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley. So they're both exhibiting behavior that may or may not be related to age, but they factor into perceptions that they're old and not at the top of their games.
A recent poll suggests that despite there only being 4 years of difference in age between Biden and Trump, 76% of respondents are concerned about Biden's mental fitness compared to 48% concerned about Trump's age. And that's troubling for Ben Osowski, a political science student at DePaul.
You need someone that is fully up for the task. So yeah, I think it's important, and some people may say the other way, but I just think, again, for a job like the President of the United States, we need to that needs to have the highest level of, scrutiny in terms of what the person trying to get the job, the qualifications for the job.
Regardless of who's running for office, DePaul student government senator Kirsten Reedford says she doesn't feel her voice is being heard.
Is that I feel like even though I'm registered to vote, regardless of who I vote for isn't going to care about me.
Like all generations, young voters want to find a president who can make them feel like their voices are being heard. Voters who are old, young, and in between all need a president who is up for the task. But finding a candidate who can strike a balance between experience, mental fitness, and meeting the demands of every generation is hard to find. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt. The overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022 means abortions are more difficult to access in many American states. Since the overturn, many women have traveled to Illinois for abortions because it's still legal here. Some neighboring states like Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, Kentucky, and Indiana have more restrictive abortion policies. But even in Illinois, access to abortion varies in different parts of the state.
Even in a state like Illinois, you're going to have a situation where those who have less access to infrastructure, right, those especially in more rural places in the state and et cetera, are going to still have a harder time accessing this type of care.
In response to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, providers such as Planned Parenthood Illinois have had to expand their services and programs to meet new demands. Julie Ewell works for Planned Parenthood and is also a manager for a program called SAFE Project. SAFE is an acronym that stands for Securing Access for Everyone.
My role in project managing the SAFE initiatives was really around, there's a lot of data that went into it, looking at our 17 health centers around the state. What capacity did we have? How many patients could we possibly see in a given year? And then that illustrates the need to hire more staff. It illustrates the need to open new health centers in certain geographic areas.
PPIL stands for Planned Parenthood of Illinois. It provides a full range of reproductive health services. The organization also provides education and age-appropriate sex ed to students. Ewell says that since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the overall volume of out-of-state abortion patients has increased from 5 to 25%.
Abortion bans don't stop people from having and needing abortions. Like, people will always have and need abortions. Bans just make it more difficult to access.
Dr. Mary Bowman, a nurse practitioner in Chicago who performs abortions, shares their experience.
Accessing abortion in the state of Illinois and having an abortion myself really catalyzed my interest in becoming an abortion provider and offering that care to people without judgment and with a lot of support.
Dr. Bowman explains,
every single person that I've encountered needed an abortion because they told me they needed an abortion, and it wasn't for me to decide.
But many in this country still oppose abortion.
We believe that every life matters. We believe that every life counts from womb to tomb.
Meanwhile, the abortion debate goes on in this country, a debate that is very difficult and emotional and may even have the potential to impact the upcoming presidential election. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt. DePaul's Faculty Council recently released their annual report regarding faculty and student diversity. I'm Lina Gebhardt. Here's how some of this report breaks down. The university's Associate Provost of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Valerie Johnson, has just shared data and observations that suggest few areas of significant growth, but a lot of room for improvement in terms of DePaul's goal of improving the racial and ethnic diversity of faculty and students. In terms of full-time faculty, last year, just 7% were Black and 7% were Hispanic, while 64% were white. And the number of Black and Hispanic faculty has grown very little in the last 3 years. Meanwhile, the number of minority faculty is less than the number of minority students. The biggest disparity is among Hispanics. 20% of DePaul students are Hispanics, yet again, only 7% of the faculty is Hispanic. Among Blacks, 9% of the university students are Black, while 7% of the faculty is Black. And some students have noticed this disparity.
I think that I've seen the underclassmen become much more diverse than when I was a freshman and I saw like all the upperclassmen. But as far as faculty, I still don't think I've had a professor of color.
The percentage of minorities is even lower among part-time faculty. Last year, just 6.5% were Black and 4.4% were Hispanic, while 68.6% were white. The report also made some observations about diversity at the university. It said DePaul's faculty diversity aligns with peer institutions and national data, but does not reflect the diversity of the university's student body. It said the biggest disparity is between Hispanic faculty and Hispanic students. The report said the numbers and percentages of faculty of color, while experiencing a modest increase, have been stagnant over time. And it said there is less diversity among non-tenured track and part-time faculty. In light of these conclusions and observations, Faculty Council member Ludwig Kamel, who's been at DePaul for 24 years, believes improvements are definitely in order, but believes the university is trying to improve its diversity.
Despite all the efforts, all social tensions that you can find in the larger society, well, you can find them also at DePaul. It's always work in progress. It's never perfect. I feel there is goodwill to improve the situation. I truly feel that.
And this ties into the university's stated commitments. According to President Robert Manuel's Designing DePaul initiative, a key aspect of the modern Vincentian University is to, quote, generate experiences which promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Lina Gebhardt.